We all have some regrets from our past, some more than others, and sometimes we tend to drag that baggage with us into our present life. Is there a way to forgive and redeem the past and move forward? Today's guest is Kevin Goos, a pastor and church planter in the Spokane, Washington region, and author of Dry Bones, Redeeming Your Past, available at befortified.life. He joins me now from Skype. Kevin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Now, Kevin, this book that you have written, it comes out a lot of your own personal experiences. Can you share what's happened in your own life that led you to write about the need for redemption?
Yes, about 25 years after being in ministry, I reached a point of just significant just burnout and reaching the end of myself and there were some lines that were crossed ethically and morally and just a so to speak a collapse of sorts, and I had to walk through a restoration journey. And out of that journey over the years, God gave my wife and I an opportunity to just share some of the lessons we learned and some of the hope that we received.
What are some of the lessons that you learned in your own journey to healing?
As part of the journey to healing, I learned that, hard work, even for good things, doesn't make up for dealing with some of the things in our lives from our past or some of the challenges in the present. I learned that bitterness and frustration, if not dealt with, can become a deep root in our lives. And I also learned that sometimes our perspectives can be skewed. As one writer said, our feelings are real, they just may not always be right.
Yeah. So, what advice would you give to someone who feels that they've maybe screwed up their past so bad that there's no hope for a better future?
First, even though we can be surprised by the difficulties or the failures we face, that God wasn't surprised by them. It doesn't mean that He approved, but He can still fulfill His purpose and His will in our lives, even though it may look different than, say, our daydreams or the idealistic picture of what we thought it would look like. There is a road ahead. We just have to be ready to adapt that God may creatively do it differently.
Now, in your book, you break down three things, like into three different sections: glory days, regrets over missed opportunities, and healing from past pain. So, why these three?
As we walk the journey, just God made it clear to us that these are three overarching themes that touch us throughout our lives. Sometimes we look back and wish we could recreate something that we used to have, and it can be frustrating, and that's that glory days. Other times it's the opposite. It's, oh, if I would have made a better decision, where would I be now? And sometimes people question life, relationships, decisions, education, career, and they think they're living a consolation prize life. And then with the past pain, whether it's things I've done or others have done to me, if not dealt with and healed from, we drag them along and they become an accumulated weight as we walk the journey of life.
You write that our decisions can either break the bonds of the past or perpetuate past failures into ongoing behavior. What do you mean by that?
Well, when God was talking to the prophet Jeremiah, he told him that he was going to have to sift the precious from the vile. So God places precious things in our life, yet these other factors, if not dealt with, become like a polluting influence. And so my decisions can either reinforce what is polluting my life, or they can move me in a path of obedience, restoring, and new hope in moving forward. So there's this sense that we have to recognize that I'm either going to perpetuate the past or I'm going to learn something new and a new perspective that can take me forward.
Talk to us a bit about the comparison trap. Is it because we tend to compare our lives to those around us?
Very much. We look at people we deem as more successful than us and we view ourselves as inferior or we covet what they have. Or I can look at somebody I think is less successful or who has failed more than I have as a way to justify maybe weaknesses or blind spots in my own life. It's not that we don't learn from others, both their successes and their failures. It's the confusion of setting up value, identity, and purpose on something other than God's plan for our lives. And so the comparison trap, what it does is it takes the eyes off of what God wants to do in my life or each person's life, and it's driving down a road with no rear view or side view mirrors. We have blind spots and we end up having relational and life crashes because we don't have perspective and the proper vision.
Interesting. I like that little, visual there. So when people look back at negative life events, there's sometimes a sense of bitterness, right? So what are some signs of bitterness and how does that affect our lives?
Some key signs is when it starts affecting the way I view the important people in my life. So a bitter person starts looking at loved ones and friends through the lens of suspicion. They have a harder time receiving and giving love, and they tend to become a cynic where someone else's life and behavior hasn't warranted it, meaning I lack trust where someone hasn't been untrustworthy. The other is that I lose the sense to be able to count the blessings for what I do have. Life is measured through, say, the glass being half empty or thinking it all the way empty. And I lose the ability to see that there are daily blessings, even though life also does have daily challenges. And those are two key factors that begin to reveal that bitterness could be rooting in someone's life.
Wow. You say that when our past needs redeeming, we try to fix people around us rather than working on ourselves.
Unfortunately, I heard one speaker say it this way: I love what the Bible says about others. I'm just not crazy about what it says about me. And one of the diverting tactics can sometimes be that if I can fix or control the world around me, I can feel better about myself, but I might be missing the point that there's things that God has to do within me. Sometimes we want to be the teacher when there are moments that God says we need to be the student. And understanding the place we are in our life and accepting that there's things we need to learn and to grow in is key to having our past redeemed.
Wow. And these are all things that you personally have experienced coming through all of this?
Yes, I spent a quarter of a century being primarily in the positions of leadership, people coming to me, expecting me to have the answers. And I went through a journey over years where God then placed me in positions of submission, of subordinate roles, where there was much for me to learn, almost like a shift in the middle of my life. And I began to see that many of the things that frustrated me had more to do with God needing to clear my perspective, deal with some things in my past, and give me fresh opportunities to move forward. So, yes, all of these I had to walk through personally.
Yeah. Now, do people going through problems like this, are they able have they sought you out personally, almost as a counselor?
There have been times, some through, through our writings, other times through speaking, and there have been other times through individual counseling that myself, along with my wife, have been able to work with individuals and couples for them to experience really God's best in their lives. We see ourselves as facilitators. We know this is a work that God needs to do in someone's life, but there are times skilled helpers make a significant difference. We know that was true in our lives, and we just want to be available to do our part, whatever God has for someone else.
That's wonderful. So, getting back to that wounded feeling, when someone has seriously wounded us, it can be so hard to truly forgive, right? Can you give us an idea of how to work through the forgiveness process and what's involved?
I admit that it's a journey, but it does come with a few key principles. One, even if someone's hurt me horribly, I have to make a decision. Is Jesus Christ and what he did on the cross, is that ultimately greater than even the sins committed against me? It's easier for me to think of God forgiving me, but sometimes I'm concerned that he might forgive someone else because I feel like they might get away with it. So sometimes we hold on to things that are like, oh no, God might forgive them, kind of like Jonah, where he was concerned that God would forgive the Ninevites. And so a principle is that Jesus is even greater than their sin against me. A second is forgiveness doesn't make them right, but it does make me free. There was a wonderful pastor who his words taught me significant in that area. And third, forgiveness doesn't always mean the same relationship boundaries. They may change for the sake of safety and trust, but forgiveness is a way of the individual being free from that other person's sin against them.
That's a great nugget of wisdom there. So, how do you know when you've truly forgiven somebody?
Well, I'd love to say that it's a magic moment. I would say that there's a few factors. One, when I find that negative thoughts and feelings about that person come up, that I'm more ready to bring them to the Lord and say, okay, God, I give them to you again today. Second, God begins to give an individual the ability to pray for other people that before they never thought they could pray for. And third, people are able to either move on in relationship without that person, if need be, because of healthy boundaries. And if there is the ability to reconnect where it's healthy and it's safe, they find that the road begins to restore relationship. That's case by case, depending on what has happened. But we find that some of those are the factors that we see that begin to reveal a forgiving spirit growing within us.
Interesting. You talk about the games people play in your book, especially when they're trying to justify wrong behavior. What are some of these games?
They can be very subtle, although they're noticed more than people think. People can do it with their looks, like maybe they're trying to gain more attention from other people. It can be in their body language, their words. What ends up happening is through the relationships of life, people try to get emotional and relational needs met from people for whom it's not intended. So, for instance, if someone's in a position of trust or leadership, like I'm in, there are certain people that I'm to serve. It's not their responsibility to meet needs within me. Part of getting away from those games is recognizing that we have to want more for people than from them, and that no relationship and no person is really ever meant to be used as a manipulation to meet an underlying need that either needs to come from God or the right person He's put in our lives.
You are full of wisdom, Kevin. Any final advice for viewers struggling with redeeming their past?
I would just want them to know that at the moment, even if they have a hard time seeing the way forward, that God does have a plan for their life. It's not a self help statement, it's a recognition that this moment is not their destiny. And I would encourage them to take intentional steps with God and maybe skilled, trusted others so that they can see that there is a light at the end of that tunnel. It may take time, but it can happen for them.
Ah, what a positive message. And with that, it looks like we are about out of time. Thank you so much, Kevin, for joining us today.
Thank you very much. It's been a privilege.